Alastair, hi. Are you sitting in the rain like I am at the moment?
Yeah, I certainly am. I'm up here in Lancaster and it's a pretty wet and miserable day today.
Yeah, well, Lancaster, you expect it, but I
Whereabouts
mean,
in the world are you?
oh well, I'm not very far south, a couple of hours south from you.
Okay.
But yeah, this isn't really June, is it? It's not really summer weather.
No, quite. But the new normal, changing weather and extreme heat, extreme weather, like it's
Yeah,
on topic for today at least.
yeah, absolutely. After our 32 degrees a couple of weeks ago, yeah, I think
Yeah.
changing climate is something that we're all a bit aware of now. So obviously our,
Yes.
our UK sustainability reporting standards landed in February,
Mhm.
and I'm not even sure how many people really are aware of it. Actually, I'm not sure with everything else going on in the world how much people have really taken it in. So I think this is a really good opportunity to have a look at what it means for business and what we need to do and what we need to be thinking about. So could you explain what it's all about, why they matter, and perhaps how talk about your clients and whether they're treating them as a compliance exercise or they're actually looking at it as sort of a strategic opportunity. So do you mind telling us a bit more about it?
Sure. Yeah, very happy to. So let's take a step back then to Glasgow in 2021. We had COP26. It's a big climate change conference. And at COP26, this thing called the International Sustainability Standards Board, or ISSB, was set up. You're gonna have to bear with me. There's gonna be lots of acronyms over the next, half an hour or so, but we'll try and work through it. But yeah, the ISSB was set up in 2021 to create a global baseline of sustainability disclosures. Outside of their work, there are literally hundreds of different ways that businesses can disclose what they're doing on sustainability and on climate action, from international standards through to sector-specific ones or size-specific ones. The list is endless. And they wanted to solve this and create this global baseline in sustainability disclosures. It took them a couple of years, and then in 2023, they published what's technically known as IFRS S1 and S2. S1 and S2, these two sustainability standards, should become, as they say, this global baseline. S1 is about the general risks and issues of sustainability. So, which parts of environmental or social or governance change are material to your business from a financial perspective? What are the risks associated with it? And then, what steps are you taking as a business to manage those risks, to set a strategy around them, to create governance around them, and then what are the sort of the metrics and the targets associated with that change? And then S2, the second part of this, is climate change specific. So thinking about how the climate change, the climate is going to change over the coming decades, how regulation and legal frameworks are going to have to change as a result of it as well. To what extent is your business aware of the risks, thinking about it, got a strategy measuring it, and got governance in place? So that's these two standards, S1 and S2. They've been adopted by some 35 jurisdictions around the world at this point. And then, yes, as you say, the UK government adopted them at the start of this year after consultation. A couple of minor tweaks to make sure that they're relevant from a UK market perspective, but essentially they're the same as these two standards. And in the UK, they're called the UK Sustainability Reporting Standards, or UK SRS. The UK government has set out their ambition to be a global leader in sustainable finance, and they see these frameworks, these reporting standards, as an opportunity to create comparable, decision useful information for investors. I think that's quite an important point, that this isn't a campaigning move. This isn't about the impact or the great work that your business can have on people around the world. This is fundamentally about decision useful information that investors need. So thinking about how the world is going to change over the coming decades, to what extent is your business exposed to that, and how does that change the valuation that they see in your business? And so, yeah, I suppose that's sort of where we're up to, as a kind of a very quick canter through. And all we're waiting for now is the UK government and the FCA to finalise a couple of consultations to understand how these are going to be mandated for different companies across the country, because otherwise they're just available for voluntary use at the moment.
So are your clients using them? Are you seeing businesses sort of really starting to pick this up, or is there a lot of sort of misunderstanding, not understanding how to get going? What's happening?
It's a bit of a mixed picture. So we're seeing a few that are already using these, either the bigger companies that know that they're going to be in scope for when it becomes mandatory, or those that are more mature in this space and they want to be seen as a leader. They know this is the direction of travel, and so they want to kind of get ahead of it. I think the majority of companies that we're speaking to are either trying to work out if they are going to be in scope for mandatory disclosure, and so looking at these consultations and sort of holding their breath a little bit, or they're not quite thinking about it. And the risk there is how long it can take a company to get ready for this. We've worked with other companies in countries around the world that maybe a year or two ahead of where the UK is on these disclosures, like Australia, for example. They're a couple of years ahead of where we are. And we've seen from some of the businesses there that if they're starting from a really low baseline, then it can take them months, if not at least a year, to get to a point where they're able to comply with the standards. So there's a real risk, especially for sort of mid-sized businesses or OMBs in the UK, that they wait too long. The key message for those businesses is that you need to start understanding where you are now, and you need to start preparing for this now.
Yeah, it's a big job though, isn't it? And it's one of those ones that everybody sits there thinking, I don't know where to start. So do you find that if you help them that you can find quite clear and easy places for them to start without finding it too difficult?
Yeah, absolutely. The key lessons, I suppose, from looking at how this has been rolled out around the world elsewhere is that chances are this is going to be launched in a fairly pragmatic and scaled way. So it's not going to hit every business in the UK all at once. It will start with the bigger businesses and then probably trickle down. And it won't necessarily be that you're expected to comply with all of the standards at once. A lot of the countries where this is being rolled out, they start with the S2, the climate change piece first, and then there's a bit of a sort of grace period, a transitional relief they call it, for the S1, those broader sustainability standards. Sometimes there's another grace period or transitional relief around different aspects of the climate change piece, what's called scope 3, and maybe we can get into that as well. And so chances are then the businesses will have a bit of time to build up and get ready for it. They don't have to do everything all at once. Plus, there's loads of information out there about how businesses can really start. And fundamentally, it comes down to just doing a bit of a gap analysis, a readiness assessment. So thinking about when these standards are likely to come into force for you, either through regulation or your investors are asking for it, or lenders are asking for it, or customers are asking for it. And then thinking through, well, where are we now? Chances are you're doing some work on sustainability that might help to answer some of these disclosure requirements, but what's the gap when we need to get there, and then what's the resource and what's the roadmap to close that gap? And that's how we're helping a lot of clients at the moment.
Yeah, that sounds a very sensible approach. A lot of people are still going to see this as being just a compliance issue, and they're going to really struggle to get their heads around why it could be good for their business. I mean, what are the sort of reasons why it would be good for a business apart from just sticking with the law and not getting yourself into trouble? So.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's an important point, to comply. Yeah, I think it's a very sensible starting point. But I'd go back to why these were created. Like, these were created with investors in mind. It's different to the EU regulations. If you're looking at those, that's much more around the impact that you're having and being a responsible corporate citizen. This is fundamentally about what's actually important to your valuation, your capital allocation, your strategy, and how do you function and stay resilient and relevant as a business. If I try and sort of bring this to life a little bit, then, so if I think about some of the businesses that I've been speaking to recently and think about how these standards have helped them to understand the magnitude of the changes that they're facing over the coming years. Agricultural businesses are a key example. Talking to a business that's got coffee in their supply chain, and they're really struggling because in some of their coffee plantations, because of the extreme weather, their crops are failing. They're really struggling to get any decent yields. They're seeing a significant reduction in the number of pollinators. All of those sorts of things are just contributing to, frankly, like falling coffee yields, and as a result, the rising coffee price, and that's having a direct impact on their sales and their profitability. The companies in that sector that are getting ahead of this, thinking about regenerative agriculture practices or moving their farms or thinking about other ways that they can shield themselves from these extreme weather events, they are already seeing the benefits, and they're already seeing better yields and, frankly, a better bottom line as well. I also think about a high street brand that I was talking to recently. They realised that their cost of sale is significantly higher in the areas of the UK where there's higher levels of deprivation, because you get more vandalism, more theft, more shoplifting. And they've also seen the opposite, that in the areas where they really go out into the community, they support their communities, and they help them to coin a phrase, level up, then they see reduction in their cost of sale and see more profitable businesses as well. So it doesn't really matter if you look at the environmental side or some of the social side. The idea of these standards is that it asks the question, where's the world going over sort of a 5-10 year period? What are the risks for your business associated with it? And how can you help to get ahead of it? So yeah, there's lots of opportunities there, because fundamentally it's about financial disclosures.
Yeah, that was a fantastic summary of it. And, I always think about the brand side as well, because customers want to buy from brands that are supporting environmental things. And you've got to, at the end of the day, you've got to think about what your customers want too. So, yeah.
Well, I was talking to a manufacturing business last week, and they're sort of manufacturing sort of some of like the packaging that some of your food and drink might come in, to kind of give you a bit of an example. And from a risk perspective, then one of the big challenges that they're facing at the moment is rising natural gas prices. And they use natural gas to dry out some of the foodstuffs that they're packaging up. And so that means fundamentally, that's squeezing their profits quite significantly. But you're absolutely right. From an opportunity perspective, they've started to think about what are the sustainable packaging solutions. And they know that their business customers want them, they're willing to pay for them, and they know that the end consumers want them as well. That whether or not they'll pay for them is a pretty nuanced question, but there's so much evidence to say that more sustainable products have much better customer retention in this space. So yeah, there's such an opportunity around this for sure.
No, that's really interesting. You mentioned before about scope 3, which kind of went straight over my head. So it's like, what on earth is that? So would you mind explaining what that is, and take us through sort of what that means for business as well?
Yeah, so this is about the greenhouse gas emissions that a business creates, and it's a really technical area. And the idea of these scopes is it's trying to put some of the different types of emissions that your business should be responsible for into buckets, so that they're easier to sort of understand and measure and communicate. But I'm also conscious that frankly, it's another layer of terminology that makes the area of sustainability even more impenetrable. But anyway, essentially there are 3-ish scopes of emissions, or categories of emissions, that a business is responsible for. Scope 1 are your direct emissions. So maybe that's a furnace, for example, a manufacturing company that's burning natural gas to dry out their products. That's scope 1. It might be the vehicles that your company actually owns, the emissions coming from those vehicles. That's direct, that's due to you, that's your scope 1. Scope 2 is then the energy that you purchase and the emissions associated with that. So if you're buying in electricity, how's that electricity created? If you're buying in natural gas off the grid, how is that refined? The third scope, scope 3, is then essentially everything else. It's about value chain. So it's about upstream and downstream emissions. For a lot of companies, especially sort of service-based companies, this is where the bulk of the emissions lie. To give you kind of common examples, it's about business travel, it's about commuting, it's about the emissions embedded in the procurement process and the things that you're buying. Maybe it's how your products and services are being used and disposed of as well. So they are sort of indirect but through your value chain and caused by your business at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does make sense. This is such a nice, clear explanation. I think they should probably put you up on a world stage so you can actually explain it to everybody. So this really makes a lot of sense. So I know as a business owner as well, the measurement has always really puzzled me. It's so what does ESG measurement look like? So are you looking at data? Are you sort of giving evidence of good governance? Or, I mean, what's it look like? How do you
Yeah, all of the above and more, I suppose. I think most businesses start usually with their emissions because it's quantifiable. There's a recognized protocol internationally in how businesses can go about doing it. But yeah, as you then start to work through different aspects of sustainability, it can then get more tricky. So, talking to a business recently about what's called social value, and then you're into a whole complicated world of, you're doing some volunteering. What's the monetary value associated with that volunteering? Or you're helping to rewild the local meadow. How do you quantify biodiversity like that? It gets really, really complicated. For pretty much all of these issues, there are recognized protocols, recognized frameworks, and a whole host of sort of technology solutions to help you through it. But if we stick with the carbon accounting piece, the greenhouse gas emissions, that's usually where most businesses start and frankly get stuck. Optimistically, the thing that sort of excites me almost about this space is that we're seeing a growth in demand around the world for assurance of these data points. So up until now, a lot of companies have been putting together their emissions on a bit of an Excel spreadsheet, putting it out in the world. And maybe it's right, maybe it's not, we don't really know. And big companies especially are now starting to get a bit nervous about that because they're having to report to what's on their supply chain. They're getting questions from their regulators or from their stakeholders, and it's making them a bit nervous. And so they're looking for assurance on these data points. The reason that gets me excited is because that not so much the assurance itself, but the change that drives. So if you think about
I was just about to
audit and
say that as
accountancy,
well. Yeah. So,
like that's the change that we're looking
yeah.
at from a sustainability perspective. And so we'll need every business to start thinking about, well, yes, collect the data, but how do you make sure that that data is clean and it's repeatable? How do you make sure that you've got the processes in place that demonstrate that they're robust? You've got the controls and the governance around your data. You've got the structure and the systems in place that show what your evidence trail is and how you kind of come to conclusions that you have. That's the change that I think is happening, and it will take a bit of time, but we're definitely seeing that growth, and it can only really be positive. The final thing I'd say on measurement is, again, it's about being pragmatic and thinking about how important it is for your business and how big your business is. So I was talking to a pretty small company yesterday about this, and if you're a big company like the GSKs of the world, then yeah, you absolutely should be disclosing all of your emissions, and they should be really accurate, and you should put a lot of time into it because lots of people are focusing on it. Your investors really care about it, and it's a material impact on your business if you get it wrong. For this small business, they don't need to be at that level of detail. What they need to be able to show is that they are actually reducing their emissions. And it's the reduction that's more important than the measurement and the data capture for that size of business, because they're not being asked for detailed measurement by their customers, for example. So yeah, I'd say that we're moving in the right direction. Assurance is sort of a really helpful way of framing this and thinking about what companies need to think through. But also, not every company needs to get lost in the weeds of it, because capturing data isn't going to stop the climate crisis. It's only actual action that is.
But that's it. I mean, it's really the really tiny companies as well, because at the end of the day, they're providing that supply chain, aren't they? So the questions are still going to come down to them, even if they're only doing a small amount of recording. They may find they get questions that they're sitting there thinking, I can't answer that. So
yeah, exactly. And it depends business to business and sector to sector what the pressures are and what have you. There are some businesses that we speak to that are small, and yeah, they're getting lots of pressure from their customers for really accurate data. Others are able then to go back to those customers and say, well, look, we can do this, or we can spend the same time actually reducing our emissions, and we can communicate how we're reducing, what's more important to you, and they're able to have that conversation. But you're right, it just depends on the unique position of the business. And I think that's one of the challenges that people face with sustainability, that you can imagine, an oil and gas company has got very different sustainability issues compared to an accountancy firm, right? And so the processes and the things they're thinking about inherently need to be a bit different.
No, I can absolutely see that. But just talking about the measurement again, so we've kind of looked at how the types of things you're measuring. Do you find people want a framework or a tool or something very specific to work within that gives them structure? Because there's been quite a lot of stuff sort of around in the market for a long time, and nobody's really understood who's credible, who isn't. They've sort of gone with odd consultants and things. And I mean, how do you see the wood for the trees amongst all this sort of tools and
Yes.
frameworks? So
Yeah, it's a really good challenge. On the whole, there are recognized international standards for how you collect and communicate this data. So for the emissions piece, there's what's called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. It's a internationally recognized standards. It's explicitly referenced in some of the sustainability reporting standards around the world, in the EU, for example. And if you're a business and you're capturing your emissions data, that's the one that you should be using. It's the most recognized. It's really rigid and robust, but also accessible at the same time. If you're looking at social value, for example, there's what's called the TOMS framework. For all these different issues, there are recognized frameworks out there. So the frameworks aren't too much of a challenge in understanding and sort of in finding them. The challenge that businesses have is then the doing of them. And yes, do you go and work with consultants? Do you hire someone in? There's loads of different technology platforms out there, some of which are great, some of which are more challenging. My team, for example,
like
we
the
worked
more
with some.
challenging, you mean
Yeah,
rubbish.
I've been in this space for like a decade, and every now and then we still get burnt by a whizzy new tool we think is great, and it just doesn't quite work in the same way. But it's the same with all these different technology providers and different platforms as well. The other thing that I'd say as well is it's worth looking at what you already have access to and whether there are other tools that you trust that then have something else in their ecosystem. So, for example, I'm not sort of encouraging the use of this particular tool, but as an example, if you do your accountancy through Zero, then as part of the Zero ecosystem, you get access, I think, free for a year to a carbon accounting tool called Sunday. And again, like if you trust Zero and Zero works for you, they've done the due diligence, they've worked out how this will fit in with their platform, and it's sort of there available for them. So yeah, there are lots of different ways of doing it, but I appreciate there's lots to think about for companies starting on this journey.
Yeah, this is where you need advice, isn't it? Independent advice, really, to help you make decisions on these things from someone who's seen it all, and rather than wasting time and money on things that don't work.
I didn't want to say it, but give me a call. We're happy to have a chat.
But the UK and the EU are really sort of diverging, and working with Germans at the moment, I can see the difference that they're facing in Europe on lots of fronts. So what is the difference? And if you're working across border, how on earth you sort of juggle it as well?
Yeah, it's so. If we take a step back, then we've got these 35 odd countries around the world that are using these ISSB standards, very similar to the UK ones. The EU is doing something slightly different. They've got the European sustainability reporting standards, and where the ones that the UK are looking at just ask what's material to your financial performance as a business. It's sort of what we would not sort of nickname outside in. So like, how's climate change changing the world, and then what impact outside in does that have on your business? What the European standards are doing is they're looking at the financial piece, but they're also looking at what is relevant from an impact perspective, like what issues can your business have an impact on. And so when they're looking at these issues, they're doing the outside in, but also inside out. So climate change might be impacting your business, but also your business can impact climate change. And then as you go through that process, then they do start to diverge a bit. Optimistically, I'd say that whilst the standards are trying to do different things, there's a lot of overlap. So we talk to firms across Europe, And if they're trying to kind of get their heads around this, if they're complying with the European standards, then chances are they're able to do the different steps that are required for the UK standards and vice versa. So which issues are important to you as a business? That thinking is pretty comparable. Some different questions, but the process that you go through is not too dissimilar. If you're capturing your carbon data, again, the process that you go through is broadly similar. There's some sort of nuances and differences between the standards, but I think to say that they're diverging is a little bit strong. And the Europeans have recently said that they're really keen to find ways to make sure that the European standards are aligning with the ISSB standards because they're becoming this global baseline. The big difference is what I outlined a minute ago. It's, are you looking at this just from a financial materiality perspective, or are you looking at this from a double, like a financial and an impact materiality perspective? If you think that you as a business will be in scope for the EU or other jurisdictions where this is important, then rest assured that that double materiality approach is frankly best practice from a sustainability perspective. The financial materiality that the UK is basing this on is really helpful in understanding the risks facing your business, because it's how the world is going to change and how that's going to impact your business. The double materiality does that as well, but it also helps understand what are the opportunities around it. So if your business has got the opportunity to make a big difference in your local community, then you talked about brand at the start, like that's a fantastic opportunity. So even if you have to go through the double materiality process, see it as an opportunity. It might help to spot some new opportunities that can help grow your business.
Yeah, and the staff enjoy those sorts of things as well. They feel like they're doing good, and it can be quite good for staff engagement as well, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. From a volunteering perspective, there's so much evidence to say that if you encourage your employees to do volunteering or work in the community, then it saves the business money because they are more engaged, there's less churn, they're more productive. There's some numbers you can put around it, but fundamentally it's a great thing for people to do, and they love it and they really believe in what the business is doing.
No, that's good. So there's two phrases that I hear, and I'd really like you to explain them a bit more, because I sort of got a vague understanding, but I think it'd be nice to have some clarity. So the first is nature disclosure, and the other one's greenhushing, which has been around for a while, but I think people use it in different contexts. So it'd be good to understand what both these terms actually mean.
Sure. Well, if we start with the greenhushing piece, because maybe a slightly kind of cleaner conversation, I guess. But a few years ago, people were talking about greenwashing. There is the idea that if you had a sustainable product, you could charge a bit more for it. Customers wanted it because they wanted to do some good and they wanted to feel good about themselves. And so you got a bit of an inflation in these green claims, essentially. So you had some companies that were genuinely and justifiably doing some really good sustainability stuff, and they were putting their products against competitors who frankly weren't, but were saying that they were green, and they were both getting the same premium, but it wasn't fair and it wasn't accurate marketing. So that was sort of green washing. Green hushing then came a couple of years later when there was a bit of a backlash against all things sustainability, and regardless of where you are around the world, chances are there's some local politics that's pushing back against the net zero agenda. And a lot of companies got nervous about talking about all of their green claims, about their net zero targets, all of the effort they were putting in. And so they just went really quiet on it. They were probably still doing a lot of the work behind the scenes. I did some research a couple of years ago, and we interviewed the chief execs of some of the UK's biggest sort of 250 companies. And we ask them every year, what are you doing on sustainability and how has it changed? And year to year, they pretty much all doing exactly the same or increasing what they were doing, but they were talking about it a lot less because it made them nervous in terms of the press they were going to get, what their customers were going to be seeing, what was going to happen on social media, what their boards were going to say. And so they were doing the work, but they were talking about it less. And that's green hushing. And I think we're beginning to see the sort of bottoming out of that, because if you're doing this work but you're not talking about it, you're missing half the opportunity and half the benefit of it.
Absolutely. And I suppose if you're following the compliance piece and capturing the data, you're much more confident in what you're saying. So it makes it a lot easier.
Absolutely
See that. So
and then sorry, go on.
Sorry, no, you go on.
Well, from a nature perspective, then, before we get into the disclosure piece, we sort of take a step back. Why should businesses care about nature? I think we've, you know, historically sort of taken it for granted. It's always there. It's not really relevant to my business. Don't have to worry about it. Fundamentally, nature is the basis of our economy and our way of life. That if we break nature, then we cease to have food and water and raw materials, healthcare, medicines, all these sorts of things are absolutely dependent on it. The UK government recently released a report that's said that the breakdown of nature is a national security risk for the country. Because if nature breakdown continues, then there'll be greater migration, for example. There'll be shortages of food and water, shortages of medicine, civil unrest, all of these sorts of things start to happen. And so breakdown of nature is a material risk for society as a whole, and so often for individual businesses. It's also, frankly, intrinsically brilliant and lovely, and there's so many social benefits that happen, right? That some amazing stats that if you're in hospital and you even have like a picture of nature on your wall, you're more likely to recover faster and in less pain and use less pain medication, let alone actually
So
being in
interesting.
nature. It's amazing. And there's sort of correlations between levels of mental ill health and the number of trees in a postcode. So by postcode, you can see where there are more trees, there is
Wow.
better mental health. Like, it's amazing. And I mean, like, personally, a few years ago, I don't know, yeah, so when I was just finishing university, I went to a really long, convoluted story, but essentially, I was getting quite involved with the armed forces. I broke my leg and had that sort of career taken away from me, and in the way that lots of 20-year-old people do, especially men. I made lots of bad decisions, and my life started to fall apart a bit. And the thing that sort of healed me was I went to live in the mountains in North Wales for 6 weeks, and it was just me, a tent in nature, and that connection, that space, healed me in a way that just being in a city never would. So, like, there's so much value for nature, and it absolutely is critical for business. We talked about food and agriculture. I was talking to a brewery recently. When nature starts to break down, they get fewer yields, hop prices go up, their business becomes less competitive. Talking to manufacturing businesses, in their supply chain, they've got all sorts of raw materials. They will get harder and harder to access and become less reliable, more fragile. And again, it starts to impact their bottom line. Other businesses are impacted by different regulations around nature breakdown. Like, there's new deforestation regulation, for example, that's going to have a material impact on lots of businesses. If you're in big tech, for example, you need water to cool your data centers and create your microchips and computer chips and things like that. That's going to get harder to do. Supply chain disruption, migration, like, the list goes on. Nature is absolutely critical for the way our whole economy works, and so many different businesses. All nature disclosure is trying to get across is, what's the impact of that nature breakdown on your business? What are the risks and the opportunities associated with it? How are you managing those risks? What's your strategy for addressing them? And how are you measuring your progress towards a better outcome?
Well, as a complete nature fanatic and hiker myself, I am totally with you. The tent in Wales sounds fantastic. I would be there now if there was enough internet. So, but this all really depends on how seriously ESG is taken within a business. And some businesses, as you've talked about, have it at board level. And so
Yeah.
it's really taken seriously. But if it's not at board level, do you find there's the follow through? What does it look like if people aren't taking it into management, or just sort of having their ESG monitor? It's like a newbie that's just come in. They say, "Oh, you can be the monitor for the environment and things." Do you know what I mean? It's some people just sort of stick it to one side.
Yeah, I do. And it's very similar to how we started the conversation, frankly, that chances are your business can still comply if you've handed it off to someone in the business that's a bit sort of separate and what have you. You'll probably still be able to comply. And so you'll probably reduce that risk. But you won't be able to capitalize on the opportunities. You won't reduce some of the more meaningful risks that are facing your business over the next 1, 5, 10 years. And so that's the challenge that are facing a lot of the businesses that aren't taking this seriously. I don't think it's quite as clear cut as whether it's on the board agenda or not, especially for smaller and medium sized businesses. I come across some businesses that, I go and speak to a company about sustainability, and it's the managing director and the CFO on the other side of the table. And that's great because they care, but it's also worrying because they definitely don't have the time to be transforming their business around sustainability. And so, they care about it at a board level, but the work isn't happening. I'll talk to other companies and they'll introduce me to a sustainability manager who lives and breathes this, and it's their full-time work, and they are transforming the business even if the board don't really care. So I think it's not quite as clear cut as it should be board level or not board level, but it's just about understanding for your business who's driving this, and do they have the permission, the resources, the social capital, whatever it is, to actually bring about the change that they need.
So if you were going to give a business a piece of advice today, so right, they're going to get going on it this week, what would you say to them to start?
If I was being cheeky, I'd say give me a call. But more honestly, the big challenge that are facing businesses, and the sort of big upside, especially for medium-sized businesses, especially for OMBs in the UK, is to go beyond compliance and realize that there are commercial opportunities to be had from sustainability. And if you take a lean, pragmatic approach, then it can make a positive impact on your bottom line pretty quickly. And so that's the challenge that I'd set for those sort of companies, is go beyond compliance and understand how it can really benefit your business.
That's great. And I said that has been absolutely fantastic. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm sure anybody listening to it will have done as well. I found it really informative. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today, and maybe in a year or so we'll do another one and see how things have progressed.
That'd be perfect. I look forward to it. Thank you very much, Rebecca.